I'm Peter Austin. That was once the home of a sword-wielding medieval killer, and this is interesting. Yes, your eyes don't deceive you. I'm currently sitting on top of a rabbit warren. In fact, I think it's also a former Badgers set, but I've seen all the rabbits living in it now. And you also heard me correctly. Rabbits were once armed and dangerous in the Dark Ages. One slightly boring qualifier there, though, is that said armed and dangerous rabbits were all in fact illustrated ones, like this cheeky chap, and not real-life furry bunnies with swords, which on the one hand isn't as exciting, but on the other means I might just get out of this wood in one piece. I don't want any trouble, alright? But of course, even if these weapon-waggling rabbits only existed on parchment, it's still pretty weird, right? I mean, why on earth would multiple different writers across several centuries make a point of reproducing this particular image and multiple variations of it time and time again? Well, I'll tell you why in the next few minutes, and I better make it quick just to be on the safe side, you know. This is the strange history of killer rabbits in medieval art. Our sources today are manuscripts, specifically illuminated manuscripts, so called because of their vibrant illustrations, sometimes placed within the text or on dedicated pages, but most often found in the margins. And I'm right to use the plural, manuscripts, because the killer rabbit image isn't just some weird bit of outsider art found in a single document. Armed rabbits have cropped up in numerous manuscripts spanning several hundred years. Indeed, that pervasiveness is partly what makes the concept so intriguing. And hey, I'll give these guys one thing, they're certainly equipped for every eventuality. When you really start looking at that breadth of documentation, you'll see that the bunnies aren't just packing swords. Some have opted for sticks and axes, others are armed with bows, and as you may have noticed by now, many have even had the forethought to bring shields with them too. Now that I can get on board with, because whether you're a medieval rabbit preparing for battle, or just a 21st century human surfing the web, it's always smart to have protection. What a segue. And it doesn't get much smarter than Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video. You see, the internet is actually a lot like a medieval manuscript. Stay with me here. It looks charming on the surface, but there are a lot of weird little threats lurking in the margins. Fortunately, Surfshark is a VPN that helps protect your connection by encrypting your data, which is especially useful if you're on public Wi-Fi, traveling abroad, or, just value your privacy. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, I could hardly make a video about killer medieval rabbits without sitting down to rewatch Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which quite famously has a violent bunny of its own. But wouldn't you know it, your device must be located in the US to stream. Big deal. Surfshark can handle this, and it's so simple too. All you have to do is pick a different region, connect with a single tap, grab a suitable rabbit-themed snack, and enjoy the show. It literally takes seconds. And better yet, you can connect unlimited devices to one account. So while I'm lounging on the sofa watching Arthurian comedies, my wife can be in another room watching trashy American reality TV and shopping for holiday flights with region-specific discounts all at the same time. Someone really needs to stop at buying so many flights. So, if you want to protect yourself like the shielded Dark Ages bunny you deserve to be, that's one of the weirdest things I've ever said, and get a great deal while you're at it, simply head to surfshark.com/Peter or use the code Peter at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. There's even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it out risk-free. But talking of risks, let's now get back to why someone's been distributing swords to medieval wildlife. What's important to note is that the killer rabbits are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to bizarre artwork in illuminated manuscripts. All sorts of unusual scenes and fantastical hybrid creatures can be found right across the board, which seems particularly strange when you realise that invariably the subject matter of these documents was otherwise quite serious, often ecclesiastical in fact. Now, it is true that when you look a little more closely at some of these seemingly nonsensical images, their relevance evidence does start to become a little clearer. For instance, a scribe might choose to insert heraldic beasts taken from the coat of arms of a noble family that perhaps commissioned the manuscript, a bit like how we show company logos in certain media today. Other times, an illustration might actually be a religious allegory relating to something written right there on the page. But these explanations definitely do not apply to every image, and that includes our particularly widespread killer rabbits. What does help us understand them better, though, is the collective name we give to this kind of artwork. All such absurd illustrations found within illuminated manuscripts are known as grotesques or drolleries, a term derived from the same root word from which we get the modern adjective droll, as in whimsically amusing, which I think I've only ever heard used sarcastically. Oh yes, very droll. And though the exact rationale for these images might have varied somewhat from one scribe to the next and evolved over time, the fundamental idea of any given drollery is that it is to some extent or other a joke. Now, yes, granted, the humour often stems from the sheer absurdity of the image. They're silly for silly's sake. It's pretty low-hanging fruit as far as comedy's concerned, actually. But as absurd as our armed rabbit motif might appear, this type of image actually does have a bit more of a meaningful punchline beyond mere silliness. Now, it's true, of course, that a joke is never funny if you have to explain it, but I will walk you through the gag regardless. Right, so one major category of drollery humour is the world turned upside down, a disruption of the natural order or a subversion of expectations. Actually, if you're as interested in weird history as I am, you might already be aware of another repeated drollery motif similar to our sword-brandishing bunnies, the killer snails, which are frequently seen doing battle with human knights. Now, it's no coincidence that both snails and rabbits are rather benign creatures, and this is where that second layer of humour lies. The joke isn't simply that any old animal is picking a fight with a human. It wouldn't work as well if it was a lion or a bear. It's that these particular animals are ones that were, at the time, so often on the receiving end of human violence, persecuted for their destruction of crops, and even eaten by certain members of the population. Now, this is best evidenced by two particular examples of the rabbit motif. In this very early instance from the Arnstein Passional, written around the 1170s, a letter T at the start of a paragraph has been turned into an elaborate drawing of a gallows from which two rabbits are hanging an unfortunate man. The important detail here is that the horn he's carrying over his shoulder tells us that he's a hunter, suggesting that his execution is in fact a punishment for the way that humans have hounded rabbits as prey for thousands of years. Similarly, the Smithfield Decretals manuscript of the early 14th century features a whole series of killer rabbit images that collectively tell a darkly humorous story in the lower margin over several pages, almost like a medieval comic strip. Here we see a rabbit shooting down another hunter, who is then tied up and actually brought before a rabbit judge to stand trial, before he too is taken to a place of execution atop the distant hill and promptly beheaded. And this is only the end of Act 1, in fact, because then the very same fate befalls his hunting hound. Shot down by bow and arrow, tied up and muzzled, brought before the rabbit court, and then carted off to the hilltop, where he is hanged from a tree. Time and again, we see rabbits that aren't simply wielding a sword in isolation, but actually going toe-to-toe with hunters and dogs, or even taking on the role of hunter themselves. In this example, they're depicted defending a tower from invading hounds, and then again they can be found on the offensive, themselves attacking a human fortification, even using a trebuchet. God, they're building siege engines now, we're all doomed. This common theme of ordinarily harmless prey turning the tables on humans, which crops up in the drolleries of completely different manuscripts over many years, shows us that these images were very much rooted in a shared sense of humour amongst multiple readers and writers. They were a wink and a nudge between those who got the joke. These are, in the oldest sense of the word, memes. Now, of course, for most people today, that word immediately brings to mind internet humour, whether it's 2000s image macros or modern-day brain rot, but the word was actually coined way back in 1976 by Richard Dawkins in his book The Selfish Gene, and refers simply to a cultural idea that propagates throughout a population or group via shared understanding and appreciation. A perfect description, really, of the killer rabbit and killer snail drollery trends. So, next time someone in the group chat posts a photo of an animal doing a human thing, or your mum shares a Minions Live Laugh Love image on her Facebook page, just take a moment to think about the killer rabbits of medieval illuminated manuscripts. It turns out we've been sending each other silly pictures for far longer than you thought. I've been Peter Austin, and that was interesting. And if you thought so too, then why not drop some YouTube hype, subscribe to the channel, and then check out this video about why some medieval manuscripts were adamant that geese grew on trees. Now that is interesting.